All right. Well, I have a follow-up question on the fight for Glass-Steagall in the United States. And I'll just say that the mobilization to pass the Glass-Steagall resolutions at the state level is ongoing, and it is really full steam ahead, and we're anticipating bringing you some very exciting reports in the coming period on our activity, including, I believe, most people have heard about the passage of Glass-Steagall by acclamation in the state of Indiana, which took place in one day. So here's a grouping of people, a grouping of legislators who really know how to get things done. One day. We had a very large delegation in Albany, New York, of activists pressing on New York, which is very important, especially when you see the makeup of the Congress, the Financial Services Committee, how New York is represented there. California, there was a convention, major Democratic convention last weekend. We're continuing the state work there. In Alaska, we have a very unsettled situation, and perhaps the Indiana example of getting the resolution through with no time wasted can be a stunning example for Alaska, whose time is running out, the time that they're in session is running out. In Iowa, we have a major mobilization. In Missouri, we have a delegation moving into Missouri. So you have this onslaught, and I'd just like to tell our viewers that the impact of handing a congressman a resolution from their home state, from their state house, is incredibly powerful. It stops these men and women who are otherwise hustling to and from hearings, meetings, etc., stops them in their tracks, and they say, oh, this came from my state house. This came from the people who I know, who helped elect me. And so it's very, very powerful. Now, at the same time that you have our onslaught, you have a counterattack from people representing the anything but Glass-Steagall faction. And it's significant because there were a couple of hearings this week on Capitol Hill that began to delve into the impact of the Dodd-Frank Act, in particular on small financial institutions. And as you mentioned in the response to the first question, we do have a number of legitimate bankers. You might call them good bankers as opposed to very, very bad bankers in the United States. But that number, since over the last decade, and especially since the passage of Dodd-Frank, is collapsing. And in the course of this hearing, what was discussed was that in the past decade, 1,500 community banks have simply disappeared. Since the passage of Dodd-Frank, 475 have disappeared since 2010. And these are the banks that serve the rural communities, farmers. They help people get mortgages. They help small towns. They help urban communities. You even had a representative who was talking about his own experience in college was because of his local community banker was able to get his parents a loan so he could get an education. And the impact of Dodd-Frank is resulting in the collapse of these banks, of the local banking activity. I would say, intentionally, these are the banks that are most connected to the real activity of the economy, to growing the communities, and they're being wiped out or due to so-called competition. They cannot be as competitive as the large banks. So that being said, you do have a response on the ground from community bankers. You have the response that we've documented well from the state houses. And we're getting the response from the House of Representatives. But the United States Senate is right now it's a big nut to crack, and you might say there are some nuts in there that need to be cracked. And I'll just relate an anecdote. In the course of some of the legislative work, a state legislator told one of our LaRouche PAC activists, you know what we need? We need to repeal the 17th Amendment. And it was the 17th Amendment that changed the election process for these senators. The legislator was saying, they don't listen to us. They listen to when the Goldman Sachs executive comes into town. They don't listen to us at the state level. So the question to you is, in this continuous mobilization, what are we going to do about the United States Senate?
Well, the Senate is an easy one to deal with. The point, in fact, is that the United States, if it continues on the present basis, like all of Western and Central Europe, is hopelessly bankrupt. In other words, if you don't make certain changes now, radical changes, the United States is hopelessly bankrupt, as the European nations are hopelessly bankrupt. They will not exist. They will be wiped off the map if a certain reform is not done. Now, there is no way you can simply reform this system in its present form. What you have to do is take a couple of measures. There is not enough credit in the surviving elements of finance and banking in the United States to restore the economy. It does not presently exist. Any program to switch things around will not work. There's only one thing that will work, and that has to be done. It's do or die. That has to be done. The point is that when we look at the picture of these banking institutions that are now dominant, they're all hopelessly bankrupt. They are, in other words, worthless. These banks are intrinsically worthless. So what are we going to do? We can save out of this whole package of losses and whatnot, we can save certain parts of the banking industry, a safe part that conforms. But the amount of money available for lending from those banks is limited. It is not sufficient using just that money to save the economy. You're still going to get a crash. So what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to supplement the original design of the U.S. bailout system of bailing out and saving the United States. We're going to have federal credit uttered and put in place to also be loaned. In other words, any way you try to juggle the banking system today in the United States, there's no possible way you're going to come out with a plus. So therefore, you're going to have to combine that part of the banking system which is legitimate as opposed to all the illegitimate junk. And we're going to have to supply federal guarantees to large-scale projects where the government, the federal government itself, will be the lender of last resort. That will work. Now, what that means is you're going to take a large project like NWAPA. NWAPA is a typical project. NWAPA is crucial for changing the food supply problem in the United States. Why? Well, because we're going to increase the water supply, and we're going to get back to growing some things. We're going to increase the amount of water used. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to come in with a lot more water. It means we're going to spin the water around more rapidly. We're going to put it to use more rapidly. And therefore, we're going to restore agricultural growth. We're going to fix Texas, the state of Texas. We're going to fix similar states in the United States by a water supply which is based on these principles, known principles of recycling water. Because what you want to do is you can use the same quantity of water passing through the United States, but you can put it through many things on the way. And what we need is a water system, which puts water through the U.S. economy for growth purposes and so forth, many times more over than they would earlier. We're going to also develop other projects. We're going to high technology projects, which means more power, more energy flux density. And these kinds of measures will work. They will succeed. And any attempt to solve this problem now the way it is, it will not work. Remember, above all, any way, the so-called gambling money, which is represented by the large speculative banks now, that will never work out for the people. It will never work out for the nation. It's waste paper. Get rid of it. So that means we're going back to a reduced amount of, we're going to wipe out many of the banks. We have to. They're wiping themselves out. They're hopelessly bankrupt. Their whole pretense that they have something as wealth is a fraud. So we're going to have to accept the fact that we start with a clean deck, which means with a reduced amount of nominal money available for lending in the banking system. But under our system, we can increase the credit available for lending and borrowing for useful purposes through the federal government supplying credit to those institutions and those enterprises which will do that job. And we just go to that. In the meantime, the fact of the matter is practically all that is considered to be the wealth of the wealthy is absolutely worthless. It's worthless crap. It's finished. Now, how does this? Why is the enemy, which includes so many of our leading bankers these days, our own leading bankers these days, why are they doing what they're doing? Well, what they're doing is they're going to bankrupt the whole world, essentially. But how are they going to do that? Well, simply, the Queen of England has set forth this entire policy. The entire policy is, we're not going to lend to these guys. We're going to cut the population. We're going to reduce the population from 7 billion people to approximately 1. That is what the Queen has declared. That is what the entire policy of the Obama administration is. The same thing. Obama is working for the Queen. His policy is reduction of the U.S. population. They're already doing mass starvation under his new legislation. The mass killing of people of the United States. That's their policy. And that's our choice. Either we go off and kill most of our own people in the United States and do it rather rapidly and nastily, and do similar things to people in Europe and elsewhere, by the fast reduction of the human population from 7 billion people down to about 1. All at once. And this President of the United States that we have is the one who is committed to doing exactly that. So therefore, if you're an honest person, you are not going to do that. You are not going to kill the people of the United States en masse or other countries en masse. You're going to wipe out these worthless bankers because they don't represent any value at all. And we're going to get a credit system going according to the original U.S. federal Constitution. We're going back to the U.S. federal Constitution exactly as it was designed. And the application of that to a credit system and to an amplification of federal credit given to worthy causes is the only solution. We can do it now, or we can all just go and die. At your choice. Make this reform now in the United States, or prepare to die. You don't have a middle choice. You have two choices, die or live. Die is to go along with the policy of the present President of the United States, for example, and the British policy. Live means go to a complete reform based on the original Constitution of the United States. It will work. It's just this one thing. We're just going to supply a federal credit system to allow federal credit to be used for investment in productive employment. And that's it. It's that simple, and it's that necessary.